Hi, this is Frank Simon with the rest of the news, and our special guest today is Mike Evans, Dr. Mike Evans. He's going to talk with us a little bit about the peace plan going on in Israel now. Corbin Sievers is with us today, too. He's going to do some of the interview.
And Dr., if it's okay, let me just give our listeners a little background here on Dr. Mike Evans. It says here he's a member of Trump's Evangelical Advisory Team. He has published 105 books. Over 38 million have been sold worldwide. He's a New York Times best-selling author. Dr. Evans, that's quite
impressive.
That's pretty impressive, right? I'm glad we didn't have to sit here and read your whole resume. We've been here for the next hour or so.
Glad to be with you.
One other thing, too, I want to say to our listeners is that you have a Facebook page with 73 million followers.
Yeah, the Jerusalem Prayer Team is the largest prayer group in history.
And what's the name of that Facebook page again?
The Jerusalem Prayer Team.
Jerusalem Prayer Team. So we obviously encourage our listeners to find that, to sign up and to start following that. So let's jump right into the interview. We only have about 15 minutes or so. Before we started recording, you and Dr. Simon are having a conversation. Dr. Simon, tell us what your initial question.
The thing that I'm very concerned about is this peace plan that's being discussed in Israel. Dr. Evans told us a lot about it. Maybe I ought to just keep quiet and ask him to tell us a little bit more about what's going on.
First thing that you have to understand, I've known all the prime ministers since Menachem Begin. I'm actually the guy that got Benjamin Netanyahu his job. I recommended him to the prime minister, told him he'd be prime minister someday, and he gave him a job. Now, no prime minister in Israel's history has ever agreed to a Palestinian state with airspace, including Shimon Peres. No prime minister has ever agreed to a Palestinian state with an army or a Palestinian state with a treaty. If we recognize the fact there's not going to be airspace, there's not going to be an army, there's not going to be a treaty, what is a state? Well, to begin with, the only way this is going to be resolved is by Israel. Israel is about the size of New Jersey. They can't give up the high ground. They can't give it up in the Golan. They can't give it up in Judea and Samaria. You're talking about rockets hitting their airports. So they're going to be totally inflexible on this. Now, the president has done exceedingly more than any president in American history for Israel. I basically predicted every one of the things he's done, and I've been part of them all in some degree, some more, some less, but I've been part of them all. Now, I believe the next thing the president's going to do before the November election is he's going to declare Judea and Samaria as sovereign Jewish land along with the Jordan Valley, and he's going to phrase it in the context that this is Bible land and the Bible is not illegal. Now, you might say, well, doesn't this contradict his plan? No, because establishing moral clarity is the basis for a plan. Israel and the Palestinians have to decide how they're going to live together. But the president has always gone to the side of moral clarity, and I think he'll do that, and I think this will be the biggest announcement outside the coming of the Messiah for the evangelical base. Whereas, on the other hand, if he came out and stood up against Israel's Bible land, it could damage him in the election, and he'll never do that.
Let me go back and ask a few questions. You had mentioned no airspace. So if there was a Palestinian state, they would have no airspace. I don't quite understand that. Could you give me some clarity on that?
If you just take New Jersey, you say to yourself, if Israel was New Jersey, and let's imagine everyone in New Jersey was an African American, and all of a sudden a decision was made that Newark is going to be given to the Ku Klux Klan, and no blacks can live there. Now, do you think New Jersey is going to allow the Ku Klux Klan to fly over New Jersey? No way. So Israel cannot permit Palestinians to have any access to that airspace. They will not have access to that airspace because in airspace in Israel you have what's called zero warning time. If you fire from Syria or Lebanon or even Iraq now, it's zero warning time. Same thing with Gaza. There will never be airspace for the Palestinians. They're never going to get the right to fly planes in that airspace. It's all going to have to be pre-approved by Israel.
I would imagine this is also the reason why Israel is saying no Palestinian army.
No
Security.
Palestinian army. Come on. Number one, an army. If they had an army, they would have other armies in there. Think about Syria. Syria had Hezbollah in there, the Revolutionary Guard in there. The Palestinians would do the same thing. And they would make treaties. They'd make treaties with Iran. And then Iran would be pouring billions of dollars worth of missiles in there like they've done in Lebanon.
Yeah.
There'll never be a treaty. There'll never be airspace. There'll never be an army. So stop talking foolishness on this. Israel just needs to declare this is our Bible land and the Bible's not illegal. And I believe the president will do it for them this year. And it's going to be an enormous announcement with astonishing prophetic significance.
Let me just go touch back on a little bit on history, too. The Obama administration signed particular treaties with Iran. The Trump administration almost immediately said, no, we're not going to allow that to happen. Was this because they were concerned about Israel's national security?
No, I think the U.S. was concerned about their own national security because if you look at the situation in Iran, Iran was establishing what's called the Caliphate. They were going in all the way from Afghanistan all the way down to Lebanon. They were taking over that region. By the way, they're controlling Iraq right now. So the national security of the United States would be threatened. Now, Iran has made threats, and what most people don't understand is the Iranians are Shia, but they're also Twelvers, which means they subscribe to the theology of the 12th descendant of Muhammad that he's coming back through an apocalypse. It's going to be mandated that there is an apocalypse, a confrontation against the great Satan and the little Satan, in their opinion, America and Israel. So the United States is not going to reward them and give them the opportunity to do that.
I'm just some average citizen here, but I heard for the longest time President Trump was an anti-Semite, and yet you just said no American president has done more for Israel than President Trump.
Let me tell you something. David Friedman is an Orthodox Jew. He's the U.S. ambassador to Israel. Jason Greenblatt, my dear friend, was over the plan, Orthodox Jew. Jared Kushner, Orthodox. Steve Mnuchin, Jewish. Do you think all these Jewish people would be working with the president who's anti-Semite? He's not an anti-Semite bone in his body. His own son-in-law is Jewish.
Right.
And his daughter converted to Judaism.
I didn't know that. Now, Jared Kushner. Yeah, talk to me a little bit about him, sir.
Jared Kushner is the best friend evangelicals have ever had. He's actually the gatekeeper, made it possible for all of us. There's a group of 25 of us, Dr. James Dobson, Robert Jeffers, Jack Graham, Sammy Rodriguez. There's Tony Perkins, Ralph Reed. There's 25 of us that are on the inside of the White House thanks to Jared Kushner. Been in the Oval Office many times with the president. We've had several dinners with the president. We have access to the president, and it's all because of Jared Kushner.
Man, that's amazing.
I didn't realize that either.
I'll tell you a beautiful story about Jared. Jack Graham used to be the president of the Baptist Convention, pastor of Preston. We're in a meeting with Jared one day, and Jack said, "Can I pray for you?" And Jared said, "Why, sure." So Jack prayed this prayer. Now, Jack's Baptist, and he prayed this prayer. He said, "Jared, the spirit of Joseph is upon you." And Jared looked up with tears in his eyes, and he said, "My grandfather's name is Joseph, who was in the Holocaust, and I named my son Joseph." Jack did not know that when he said, "The spirit of Joseph is upon you." That's a Baptist prophesying.
So we only have a few minutes left, and I'm looking at their communique, I guess you might say, received from your office. Can you sort of give us an idea as to, let's say, for example, heaven forbid, Joe Biden wins the presidency? How might that impact the U.S. and Israel relations?
Let me put it this way. If Joe Biden wins, you're going to have Bernie Sanders in one ear, and you're going to have Jay Street in the other ear. The country, which will be in the crosshairs under a Joe Biden presidency, won't be North Korea, won't be Iran, it'll be Israel. Because all the anti-Israel leftists are going to attempt to vent their spleen. So they'll try to suspend aid to Israel. It'll be a nightmare from hell for the state of Israel. Listen, I'm very close to Netanyahu. I believe Netanyahu doesn't believe Donald Trump is going to win. I think he needs to move forward and annex the territories and stop all this, because he's fixing to step into a deep alligator swamp if Biden wins.
Would you say that Biden's possible current Israeli policies is just sort of like an extension of what Obama was doing?
Yeah, I would say fundamentally so, but Joe Biden is not anti-Israel. He's not. But on the other hand, the party is. The leftists have taken over the Democratic Party, and they're going to define the policies of the party. Israel isn't going to be getting any gifts. Christmas won't be coming for Israel.
We have to unfortunately end the interview. I hope that maybe at another time we can call you, do another one. That'd be great.
Why not?
I just wanted to say, can you give us your website?
Yeah, it's the JerusalemPrayerTeam.org.
Okay, JerusalemPrayerTeam.org. You've published 105 books. So you just sort of throw out one book that you would really like for some of our listeners to buy and read?
I have a new book out called The Great Awakening is Coming. This is a very important book for this time we're living in, because here's what's going on. Christians in America are worried. They're wondering, are we being judged for our sins because of the plague like Egypt, because of the race riots, because of all the instability? The most important thing for Christians is God's blessing. And if Donald Trump recognizes sovereignty, it goes to Genesis 12, I will bless them that bless thee and curse them that curse thee. So that's why I wrote The Great Awakening is Coming, because I believe that we're in the midst of a rude awakening, and we need a great awakening.
I'm going to conclude, and then Dr. Simon may have something to say, but I want to assure you that if you ever need a solid friend of Israel, that's Dr. Simon here in Louisville, Kentucky. Always call upon Dr. Simon if you're looking for another friend of Israel.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you.
Give Bob my love.
Yeah, I'm a disciple of Bob Rogers.
Well, Bob Rogers is my buddy. I knew his father well.
Well, that's fantastic. All right, sir. Well, we will be in touch for another interview, and I just want to thank you right now for your time.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lord bless you.
Lord bless.